Hello and welcome to this regular meeting of the Planning Commission on Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. This meeting is called to order. I'll request staff to call the roll for commissioners who are present and not.
Commissioner Davidson,
Here.
Commissioner Lubomirsky,
Here.
Commissioner Mercado,
Here.
Commissioner Saudi,
Here.
Vice Chair Privatali,
Here.
and Chair Samudzi.
I'm here. All right, next we'll move on to the order of the agenda. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Next we'll move on to meeting procedures. Due to the COVID-19 shelter-in-place order, we've had to establish new ways of conducting our public meetings. I'd like to ask staff to address how public comment will work this evening.
Thank you, Chair Samudzi. This meeting is being streamed live to YouTube, where viewers can provide comments on live chat by going to www.youtube.com/City of San Rafael or by phone at 669-900-9128 and entering the meeting ID, which is 897-5534-1830 pound. In addition, we are also offering closed caption streaming of this meeting. The link to the closed caption service can be found in the YouTube live chat box. Those who would like to provide comment on YouTube will need to have a Google account, and you can create one at accounts.google.com. If you're participating by phone and you wish to provide comment, you'll need to press *9 when the chair opens the public comment period. Once it's your turn to speak, you're going to hear a notification that you are able to participate. And at that point, you'll press *6 to unmute yourself and you'll be able to speak. You're going to be limited to 3 minutes. And when you do that, please make sure you have the volume of any other device turned off so that you don't get feedback or an audio delay. If you're wishing to provide comments via YouTube, you can go ahead and type in public comment in all caps first. Introduce yourself and provide comments in groups of 200 characters per comment. You'll want to provide no more than the allowable 3 minutes worth of text. Your comments will be read as they are submitted. However, I want to say that words including profanity, obscenities, or discriminatory language that disturb the decorum of this meeting will not be read into the record. If you submitted comments prior to the meeting by email or letter, they have been forwarded to the Planning Commission and they are published on our website.
Great, thank you, Allie. Let me now describe the meeting procedures. We'll begin with the staff report, then we'll hear from the applicant. The applicant will keep their presentation to no more than 10 minutes. At that point, then, members of the public will be invited to speak. We'll read any comments that are made into YouTube live chat, as well as people on the conference call who can speak when they receive the notification that they've been unmuted. For members of the public, please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. At that point, the commission will then have the opportunity to ask questions of staff, applicant, or the public after each segment. We'll then close the public hearing and bring the matter back to the commission for discussion and action if necessary. Is there anyone with an urgent communication on a topic not on the agenda? You may address the commission at this time.
I'm going to go ahead and check to see if there's anyone in the Zoom call wishing to speak. I see no hands raised and I see no items in the chat. So nothing.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the consent calendar, which has just one item, which are the minutes from March 9th, our March 9th Planning Commission meeting. And this item is just the approval of the commission meeting minutes for March 9 with a recommended action of approve as submitted. Are there any public or comments from the public on the consent calendar?
And again, I'm looking to see if there's anyone from the public wishing to speak. I see none and I see nothing in the chat at this time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments or edits from anyone on the commission? And hearing none, I'll entertain a motion. Please announce your name as well if you run a motion.
Davidson, I move to approve the minutes from March 9th.
Mercado, I'll second.
Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'll ask staff to conduct roll call.
Commissioner Davidson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lubomirsky?
I'll abstain. I wasn't there.
Commissioner Mercado,
Yes.
Commissioner Saudi,
Yes.
Vice Chair Privatali,
Yes.
and Chair Samutzi.
Yes. Okay, we'll move on now to tonight's item for the public hearing. Our one item is to have a public hearing on the proposed amendments for the San Rafael Municipal Code related to accessory dwelling unit requirements in compliance with state adopted regulations. This is case number Z021001. Project planners are Ali and Michelle Ginn, and we have the recommended action of adopt resolution. So at this point, I will request a staff report.
Okay. So, Chair Samutzi, as you mentioned tonight, this presentation is regarding accessory dwelling units and a proposal by staff on a recommended ordinance. I just wanted to give you a brief introduction. This is going to be, as you mentioned, a presentation by myself and by Michelle Ginn. I will provide a brief presentation or introduction on kind of where we, where we've been in the past few years, some state legislation and limitations that have been established by that state legislation. And then I'll have Michelle provide you with a discussion on what our proposed ordinance contains. Michelle, again, is one of our permit services coordinators, but has been providing support and process improvement and input on budget and providing some code amendment recommendations as well. So I'm really happy that she's going to be presenting to you tonight. So I'll start with state legislation. Over the past several years, actually, we've seen some changes at the state level on a number of different housing topics. Accessory dwelling unit changes have been one of those topics. Essentially, the state legislation, the effort is that an effort to provide an opportunity to make it easier for applicants to maneuver the permitted review process when it pertains to accessory dwelling units. And so the current, what the legislation did is basically invalidated our current second unit, what our existing second unit ordinance required in terms of a review process and limitations on development and locations. The state legislation modifies a government code 65852.2. And basically what we have done is we've come up with, kind of been doing a lot of work on how to address the changes at the state level and really trying to keep in mind that the effort is to simplify the process for developing accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. The state legislation limits what cities can do with relation to minimum lot size. Cities can no longer require minimum lot size to be a prohibiting factor for accessory dwelling units. Previously, junior accessory dwelling units within the city involved modification of an existing bedroom. That no longer can be the case. The current state legislation allows any conversion of an existing or proposed portion of a residence to allow a JADU. What it does do is it limits the size of a JADU. Owner occupancy requirements can no longer be established by local jurisdictions. There are parking limitations that local jurisdictions can require if you live within a certain distance, if an ADU is proposed within a certain distance of public transit. The legislation also limits our ability to require replacement parking for ADUs or JADUs that are converting existing parking spaces. We are subject to time limits for review. ADUs and JADU submittals need to be reviewed in a ministerial way, meaning we can't establish a discretionary process. They're just basically a building permit submittal. We're reviewing and checking for compliance with development standards that are established, and like I said, they're basically building permit submittals. The state legislation also established fees for ADUs that are less than, limits fees that are for ADUs that are less than 750 square feet. So meaning that we cannot charge impact fees for these types of ADUs. And then it finally places code enforcement limits. Owners can request delays of 5 years for violations of a ADU, as long as the violation does not result in a public safety issue. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and have Michelle provide a presentation on what areas we can have kind of city-specific regulations and what those regulations will be.
Thank you, Allie. So as you pointed out, there's a lot of stuff we can't change based on the state law. So I'd like to focus on 4 areas where the city of San Rafael does have discretion to adopt specific standards through the adoption of an ordinance. So we're going to look at size of unit, required setbacks, height restrictions, and location restrictions. So size of unit. The state law has increased the maximum size that we must allow of the unit. With the adoption of an ordinance, the city is able to establish a more strict unit size within certain parameters. So we still have guidelines there that we must allow for efficiency units, which are units with a minimum floor area of 150 square feet. A JADU size can range anywhere between 150 square feet and 500 square feet. That's not changing. Unit size must be at least 850 square feet for a studio or a 1-bedroom unit, or 1,000 square feet for an ADU with more than 1 bedroom. And conversion of existing structures or a portion of the existing primary residence of an ADU cannot be subject to limit size. So what we are proposing in the ordinance is to provide a simplified approach by following the guidelines and establishing a maximum allowable floor area of 1,000 square feet for a new attached or detached ADU. That way, regardless of all those other factors, it will just be 1,000. And then there will be no size limit for the conversion of an existing space because we can't. Next slide, please. And then required setbacks. So the maximum required rear and side yard setback for an ADU is 4 feet within the state law. The state law, however, is silent on the front yard setback limitations. So staff is proposing that the front yard setback of an ADU comply with the setback established for the primary residence. So for example, if they have a 15-foot front yard setback, the ADU would also have a 15-foot front yard setback. Currently, all accessory structures located between the front setback and the front facing wall of the house require design review. So it would be within line with what we've already approved. The only exception to that would be reverse corner lots, which was a new term to me when I came to the city. So a reverse corner lot, for anyone who doesn't know, is a property where the rear yard of the property meets the adjacent lot's side yard. And for there to be consistent with the rest of our standards, we're proposing that the rear 20 feet of the street side yard have a 15-foot setback, which is the same as it is for the primary residence. Next slide, please. And then we have height. So the state law required that currently accessory structures in our code can't exceed 15 feet in height, but the state law says that accessory dwelling units can be up to 16 feet in height. So with the ordinance, accessory dwelling units that comply with the minimum development standards for the established primary residence will have the same height limitations as the primary residence. So if the primary residence is allowed to be 30 feet tall and the ADU is within the development standards, it also can be 30 feet tall. For example, staff is proposing to allow a height increase of a detached accessory unit of no more than 1 foot when such an increase results in an improved design. And then the only other exception is to be consistent with existing regulations in the Eichler Alliance Overlay District. No accessory dwelling unit located in the Eichler Alliance Overlay District can exceed 17 feet in height. And next. And then the last area that we're proposing modification is in location restrictions. State law does allow the cities to prohibit accessory dwelling units or junior accessory dwelling units in certain locations due to public safety reasons. Staff has identified certain streets that are difficult to access due to narrow travel lanes or maneuvering difficulties or turnaround issues. And this list was determined by the fire chief and the community development director. And staff is proposing that the ordinance prohibit ADUs and JADUs on those streets. The ordinance recognizes that the list will need to be updated from time to time. It's not meant to be a static set in stone list. And the community development director will be obligated to maintain and update a published list of those streets. And currently there is a draft list of those streets in the staff report, and it's also on the ADU webpage for the public to review. I think that was all I had on.
Okay, so back to me. So I was going to say notwithstanding. It's not one of my favorite words. I always kind of struggle with that. What it happens, regardless of what those development standards that Michelle just mentioned, there are certain ADUs and JADUs that are that have to receive approval pursuant to the state legislation, and it depends on whether they're in single family or multifamily, related to single family or multifamily lots. And so I'll go through those. First, starting with the single family ADUs and JADUs. What the state legislation says is that regardless of the standards that we just mentioned, the city must approve one ADU and one JADU located within the residence, as long as it meets the side and rear yard setbacks that are the very minimum to comply with fire safety requirements. In addition, one detached ADU needs to be approved if it complies with the 4-foot side yard and rear yard setbacks, and it's 16 feet max height, and the ADU is no more than 800 square feet. The detached ADU can be combined with a JADU that I mentioned under item 1. So basically, we're talking about an applicant could come in and request an ADU and a JADU. So a JADU, and then separately, they could request an ADU that is attached or detached, and they would be basically allowed to 2 ADUs within that lot. For multifamily ADUs, the city must allow at least one ADU with an existing multifamily dwelling, and must also allow up to 25% of the existing multifamily dwelling units for a multifamily structure. In addition, the city must allow 2 detached ADUs if they are located at least 4 feet from the side and rear setback areas, and 16 feet max height. So these are sort of guaranteed ADUs, regardless of the development standards that we have come up with. If applicants propose these types of ADUs, the city must review those as a ministerial review process and cannot prohibit these types of ADUs. So we have provided a section in an ordinance that recognizes this, this limitation by the government code. So that's it in terms of what the ordinance proposes. We did receive a number of comments in related to the ADU ordinance. What we did is we posted our ADU draft ordinance on our website, and we allowed for the public to provide comment. I think we initially posted it in January, I want to say. And so we did receive comments over time. Some of the comments that were in support of establishing this type of ordinance recognize the city's need for flexibility in providing additional rental housing. recognize the value in fast tracking or streamlining the review process and minimizing the restrictive size limitations that existed with our second unit ordinance. And again, supported provisions that allowed ADUs given the needs for more housing within the city. Some of the comments in opposition was a general worry over the lack of parking and traffic that could result from ADUs, interest in preserving quality of life. There was a concern that the city should not be facilitating affordable housing within the city. Concerns that 16 feet might be too tall. And then one comment in opposition was in opposition to prohibition on certain streets, and it wasn't about prohibit or opposing an ADU ordinance, but really in opposition to limiting within certain streets. We did receive a couple of correspondence since distribution of the staff report, and those comments recommended some changes. Some of the changes include adding restrictions for hillside, but separately also removing restrictions for hillside lots. An overall prohibition of ADUs as short-term rentals was one of the recommendations. Recommendations for adding additional qualifiers for ADUs within half-mile of transit. And that was, rather than the standard that we're using now of a half-mile radius, that there be a limitation of a half-mile walking distance. A reference to the red line version of the proposed amendments. I think there were a couple of places where it wasn't clear to the commenter about what the proposed changes would be. There was a interest in removing an owner occupancy requirements overall, not just for ADUs, but also for JADUs. There was an interest in adding language that verifies that ADUs are allowed at least a minimum of 16 feet in height. And then the changes to the guaranteed ADUs, requesting provisions that require for those units a level of affordability or some sort of a voucher system. There is nothing in this in these comments that would inspire us to require any additional changes to the proposed ordinance. One thing that I would like to mention though is that for ADUs that are located within half-mile of transit, the state legislation does identify as walking distance as a metric that should be used. In prior iterations, the state had not identified whether it should be walking distance or a half-mile buffer. The city we decided to play it safe and establish that half-mile buffer. It's an easy metric for us to use. It's something that's very clear and simplified. It's something that's an applicant or property owner can easily look at a map and identify whether they're within that half a mile of transit. And so for that reason, we're not proposing a change to that measure of distance. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Allie, I had a quick question. I thought I knew the answer, but after floor area ratio, if I'm in a neighborhood that's, say, just hypothetically 50% and my existing house is 50%, I'm allowed by right to add an ADU and we can't stop it?
That's right. You're allowed at minimum an 800 square foot ADU without any limitations.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had a similar question as well. So the lot coverage and the FAR is that square footage is exempt from both of those calculations?
Right.
Okay.
I think I understand. Yes. So no development standards can be applied for the guaranteed ADUs.
Okay. And then I had a question regarding existing structures. So in San Rafael, there's a number of detached garages and other ancillary structures that people likely would use to develop, like to use as a to remodel and make an ADU out of. But some of those don't fall within the, restrictions. I know, like, you have that 4-foot rule, the 4-foot setback. And then there's like, so there is an allowable like 1-foot ability for the planning, whoever's like the staff on that to help, create a variance. Or what's the method for variances for actually using existing structures that don't fall within the setback or the height limitations? I guess that's my.
So the limitations for conversion of existing space that are, so that the limitations don't apply. So if you have an existing accessory structure that's located within 3 feet of the side or rear yard and is 17 feet high, as long as it was constructed and, with permits, you can convert that without triggering any additional setback or height limitation.
Okay.
There's no limit. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. And then I just had one more question regarding the map for the streets that were deemed like too narrow or inaccessible. If those property owners would like to develop an ADU on their properties and they can show that they have a driveway that's adequate for turnaround, or, like, I'm just thinking there may be a property owner that has a mother-in-law that they need to house, or somebody in their family. I think they should be, can they still do the 800 feet by right? Or are they excluded from that 800 by right?
I believe they can still do it by right. I'll have to double check that. So one of the things that we were looking at when we were talking about the restriction, the prohibited streets was, is there a way to address that impact by making sure that there's enough parking on site? And I think, so the answer to that is that the reason these streets have been identified is that it's not only about access or enough parking.
Access, yeah.
It's just that entire roadway leading from, a roadway that is accessible to public safety apparatus. That roadway beyond that is difficult to maneuver. And so it's not just about the parking, but about the maneuverability of that roadway. And so something that the fire department currently is working on is, as part of the fire management plan, is identifying ways of addressing this kind of narrowness. And they're looking into creation of a parking box program. And so there may be opportunities to expand ADUs within those areas in the future, depending on what the outcome of that program is. But in terms of your answer, I think the 800 square foot ADU would still be, that's still kind of a guaranteed. Michelle, I don't know if you have a more direct answer to that question.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. I thought we had actually determined it was the other way around. So I think we should definitely look into that, maybe ask the attorney to make sure. Because I thought when we looked at it that the decision was that it would just not, you just wouldn't be allowed and there'd be no process to alter that.
The state allows it's would the state trump our map?
So what I'm saying is I think that what the state law says is that we can prohibit them there because of safety issues.
Got it. Okay.
So I think it would just be a blanket no,
Got it.
but it might be something to look more at.
That's how I read the ordinance.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Yeah. I just was wondering if, like, you have a property owner, they could really push back on what they consider as safe. But I guess that's why I have city attorneys and fire departments to help determine that.
Any other
I got a few questions.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just wondering about the height requirements and restrictions. So I'm somewhat concerned that we may see some ADUs that are particularly higher than the surrounding structures. I'm just wondering, like, first of all, how did the 17-foot limit for the Eichler Alliance District come about? And also, was there any thought into possibly restricting the height of an ADU to the height of the house?
Yeah, so starting with the restriction for the Eichler Alliance. So in general, the ADUs are allowed to be developed through a building permit process. Their applicants can request a deviation of that to a higher ADU, a taller building. But in the Eichler Alliance areas, we already have a limitation of 17 feet as a max. That was an ordinance that was established a number of years ago. And so wanting to respect that fact that there's an area that has already been identified as kind of a single story box, we identified that as kind of being unique. There is a limitation on the height of a ADU that could be no taller than what's allowed for a single family residence. Regardless of that, they would have to go through a design review if they're exceeding the 16-foot height limit. And the exception is that conversions of ADUs can be, there's no limit. Like if you're within that box, you can convert the upper story, you can convert the lower story, or you can convert it so that, you know, you're basically breaking the unit in half. And I mean, there's no limitation really. But yes, there is the ability to limit based on the height of the existing district, and that is included in our ordinance.
Okay, great. And then my next question is about the sufficiency of backyard space. And I was trying to figure out if this is addressed by the ratio of the lot size to the primary house, and then combined with the square foot limitations of the ADU. But is there a way to confirm that there will be at least some backyard space maintained?
So the way the ordinance reads, we established that no lot coverage limits would apply, and so that means that there would be no we would not be looking at the rear yard space. So the way the legislation reads, I believe, is that we can't establish lot coverage limitations if it's going to preclude development of an ADU of at least 800 square feet.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Sorry. I would want to add though that we do, so when you get over the 800 square feet, our regular development standards do come into play. And our accessory structure section does say that you can't take up more than a certain percentage of your required yards. So I think that once they get over the guaranteed 800 square feet, then there would be some room to limit based on that portion of the zoning code. Because they're not allowed to take up more than 40% of the required yard.
I see. Okay, that sounds good. My next one is just about the rental term. Is it a minimum 30-day rental term? Is that the way it works?
No, actually, for accessory dwelling units, we don't have a minimum established.
Okay.
And the reason for that, and I think for JADUs, that there's a difference. It needs to comply with the government code, and that government code does say a limitation for JADUs. But the reason we didn't propose a minimum stay is because this topic came up when this short-term rental ordinance came before the city council a number of years ago, and the topic of whether the city council wanted to prohibit the rental of ADUs as for short-term rentals. When that topic came up, the conclusion was that they were not interested in prohibiting that, and so we didn't propose a change to that. However, if your planning commission is interested in seeing that, we can include that in the recommendations to the city council.
Mhm. Is there some other ordinance that would limit the use of ADUs as vacation rentals or, very short stay
No, I mean, I think what
offerings?
what we'd need to do would be, if there was an interest in adding this to this accessory dwelling unit ordinance, that we would also need to come back with an amendment to the short-term rental ordinance, because in the short-term rental ordinance, accessory dwelling units are allowed to be rented for less than 30 days.
Okay, thank you. And then just a tangent to the same topic is I agree that it would be good to remove the owner occupancy requirement for ADUs, but I was wondering what your thinking was on that.
The ordinance does not propose an owner occupancy requirement for ADUs. There is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the state legislation does have an owner occupancy requirement for JADUs. And so we would want to keep that just because that's the state is requiring it. But for a regular ADU, we would not be imposing limitations.
Okay, sorry, I misinterpreted. I think something that was said before. And just two more. So I noticed that there was an allowance for there not to be a parking space required if there's a car share space on a block. And I was wondering what happens if that car share space disappears because of the insolvency of the car share company, or just the car share company decides not to have a car share space there anymore.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the Michelle, you may correct me if I'm misquoting this, but I believe that's something that is also a state mandate, and so that's, I think, a topic that we discussed as well. Right now, what we are limiting that boundary to right now is just that half mile of transit. I think if somebody wanted to say, I live within a certain distance, they would have to provide what that car share format look like. But once it's in place, once the ADU is in place, I don't know what we do.
Right. Okay.
Space goes away. Yeah.
I think
Okay.
since we can't condition it, it would remain. There's nothing, we can't condition the approval upon if it leaves, so.
Right, okay, makes sense. And then my last question is just about historically significant areas and properties. Is there any requirement for the ADU to match the look of and the style of the historically significant property?
No, what we would likely do, and we do this with other, any type of change to a residence, whenever it's a change that involves a residence, historically significant residence, we ask for a historic resource evaluation to determine whether there's value to the architecture of that building, and if so, a recommendation on what, how the change, whether the change has an impact on that level of significance. And often it's not really a matching recommendation, it's more of a similar but different. As an example, we had a resident that was proposing a deck with an expansion of a roof line. That roof line changed, the value that residence had in terms of architectural significance. So a modification to that proposal was made so that it retained that value from the front, but still allowed for that expansion. And so the same would apply for an ADU if a recommendation or if a request for an ADU that showed an expansion of the residence was presented to us as part of a building permit submittal, we would ask for the same information. And as long as a historic resources evaluation was concluded that it was it retain its value, then we would allow it. And if there was recommendations in the evaluation that recommended changes, then we would ask the applicant to make those changes. Typically for a detached structure, there would be no impact because you're not changing the value of the structure. You're not changing the structure itself. I can't think of a place. Sometimes the setting is significant as well. I can't think of a location in San Rafael where that would be an impact with a new detached ADU, just because of how it's, how our development of San Rafael has occurred over time. But I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. No more questions.
So, Ali, could I turn my garage into an ADU if it's inside the existing?
Yes.
So that even though if there was something saying I needed to have a garage in my house, I don't anymore.
Correct.
Thank you. I'm doing that tonight. As soon as it's over. Come on, baby.
You need a building permit.
Come on over.
What's challenging though is if you add square footage to your house and you don't have compliant parking, you're required to add compliant parking. So there's like, you have two sides of the coin happening, right? With our code.
Oh, I thought the parking requirement was removed.
For the ADUs, but if you say you add a second story addition and you have only one parking
I don't
spot.
have that kind of money. I
know, but I'm just saying that like it's the codes that we have are they're giving preference to adding housing units and not people to have bigger houses, right? So if you have money to make your garage an ADU, I think you have money to add a bedroom.
Oh, that's a big foundation work. Believe me, I love Bret Hart. Love Bret Hart. All right. Thanks, Ali.
You're welcome.
Mally, I had a quick question on public transit. I don't see that it's defined. Is it defined anywhere in our code? Do you know? You don't have to say it. You don't have to define it. I'm just wondering if it is.
Actually, Michelle, did we add a definition in our code? I don't think we did.
Not yet. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we did. I'll have to take a look at, there is a definition in the government code, and I'll have to take a look to see if that's the same definition that's used for, I'm assuming it's the same definition that's used for other housing projects where transit is defined as, the half mile to transit is defined.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure it's like in CEQA and all of that. I didn't see it in there, so I wanted to know if there was something unique or separate that the city wanted to do.
Okay, any more? Go ahead.
I have a question about fees. It says that up to 750 square feet, you can charge mitigation fees, but anything above that, you can. And it seems like the city is proposing to have a cap on size at 1,000. And my question is regarding some fees, for example, the transportation facilities fees that apply to accessory dwelling units that are over 750 square feet. Does San Rafael have a mechanism on how to prorate those fees? Because it seems like if you just use the size of the ADU to the size of the homes, you'll be penalizing the smaller house owners, and the people with the mansions adding the ADU pay a very tiny portion. Has that been, has a formula been worked up?
So I'll respond in this way. In general, if it's 750 square feet, well, if the ADU is 750 square feet or less, the city cannot apply impact fees. And so everything from the traffic impact fee or transportation facilities fees, the way you call it. Separately, if the ADU exceeds 750 square feet, impact fees could be applied at a proportional rate, right? So it would have to be just proportionate to the construction of the ADU that's over the 750 square feet. And then Another separate category is this traffic impact fees. We have concluded that we're not charging traffic impact fees to ADUs. So I think you're
Oh.
concerned about whether we're charging impact fees specifically for traffic impact fees. We're not charging those
Okay,
ADUs, but
so
other-
the city has decided that regardless of the size, if they're between 750 and 1,000, these additional fees will not be charged
for ADUs, right?
for ADUs. Okay.
But
Okay,
other
great.
impact fees would still apply to ADUs.
Say that again, Ali.
Other impact fees, like I'm trying to think of construction maintenance fees would apply at a proportional level.
So, okay, so other jurisdictions are working out a different formula because of the inequality of the proportion.
Mhm.
The city has not, so it's just going to be proportional.
Not at this time, but that is something we can look at, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the city would be open to a different formula because it does penalize the smaller homes. Like if I own a 900 square foot home and I want to add a 700 square foot home, I'll be paying almost 100% of all the fees versus, you know, a mansion will be paying like 10% of the additional fees. And I know that our other jurisdictions have opted for a different formula. So I was just curious if San Rafael is entertaining that.
That is something that we should be looking at, yes.
Okay. And I would like clarity on the discussion earlier regarding the slide where you had what the city must approve. Like if you meet this criteria, the city has to approve it. And the way I understand it is that it does get approved, regardless if you're in the location where the fire department has already made a statement where they can't get to you, so you should not allow them here. But if they meet this criteria, the city has to approve it regardless of the safety access, right? Is that what you're looking into, or has that been established?
I believe that what Michelle's saying is that safety, fire safety, public safety trumps the ability for somebody to be able to install or construct an ADU regardless of this guaranteed.
Okay, so that means that since the city has a list of these locations, then anybody living in those locations, they're like not at all doing a JDU or an ADU. They're not gonna get entitlements.
That's correct.
Okay, okay. And my last question is, so since we started allowing and encouraging all these ADUs, does the city have data on how many have been approved and whether or not that's making a difference in the shortfall of housing?
We do have data, actually. I don't have the exact numbers available right now, but we are talking about in the last year about 30 ADUs.
30, okay. I was just wondering if that's good, is that average, is that bad? Is that meeting our expectations? I just have no idea whether we're on the right path. Is this working? Is this meeting the state's expectations?
It's definitely making a difference. Just as a comparison, before 2019, we were seeing like maybe 5 ADUs a year. And since the legislation has changed, we're seeing 20 to 30 a year. So there's been quite a bit of a difference.
Are all of these units?
I was going to ask do you think it has to do with shelter in place because people are now focused on creating more space on their properties?
I don't know that there was significant difference in the last year, maybe, but even prior to the last year, 2019, we saw a pretty significant jump. 2018 as well. If I can, as we're kind of waiting around to see if anybody's going to talk, provide comments. I mean, I can grab that information really quickly.
Yeah, I would expect that this is creating, these type of measures are really providing incentives for people to do the work because they know they're not going to have roadblocks. And I think it's a good thing.
I would say just from I'm sorry, go ahead.
These numbers are going to count towards our arena numbers?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Yeah, I was going to ask briefly about the arena numbers as well. Is it right that they count as residences even if they are short-term rentals? It doesn't matter.
They count as new units. Yes. So we wouldn't normally know when we issue permits and when an applicant receives occupancy or final inspection, whether it's going to be a short-term rental. So we receive credit when we see a building permit issued, and we receive credit when we see occupancy or a final inspection. So
Okay.
we still get credit for that. In addition, what we are receiving additional credit for is if a unit is 500 square feet or less, we are able to count that as a below market rate unit because of the virtue of, kind of the nature of the size of the unit tends to provide opportunities for a lower rental rate.
I see. Thank you. And just one other comment. Is it fair to assume that short-term, the rentals are not super popular in San Rafael like they would be, say, like in San Francisco, where I know that there's been a lot of controversy?
About the short-term rentals? Sorry.
Yeah. In San Francisco, just over the last few years, there's been a tremendous amount of controversy about short-term rentals because it's, impacting the residential. It causes limitations to the residential rental market, long-term rentals. People make more money, short-term rentals. I imagine that's not a problem here, though. Is that a fair assessment?
I mean, we haven't seen that yet. I know that there have been some issues in other locations. We haven't seen that type of thing here yet. I'm not sure what to expect in the future, but so far we have not seen that.
So I guess for added,
Thank you.
Just for added color, Ana Santiago sent me the data for the number of STRs that are in San Rafael, and since the ordinance passed, I think November 2019. The city started taking registrations in January 2020. There are currently 104 registered addresses with short-term rentals in the city. All right.
I think the issues are more having to do with noise and parking than they are with, with rentals at this point. But, who knows when we start building more units in the next 10 years, it may become an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Ellie, I know you're still.
Chair Samucci looks like he has some fun things going on in the background there.
The one thing I was the comment I did have on the prohibited areas is I see that you identify the streets, and then I see that it says typically, it's less than 14 feet of a street width for the fire. I didn't see many more findings, really not much more data behind it. And so I'm not sure if it's something that's on record with the city, where if I live on that street, is there a report or an analysis or something that would explain why I would be limited from being able to?
I think that in the ordinance itself, we should be including something in the whereases perhaps, and maybe I think in looking at the resolution, I think if you're thinking that it would be feel more comfortable to specifically state that there's the purpose for prohibiting, for identifying streets that where ADUs would be prohibited. The purpose of it is to address an inability for public safety vehicles to access or maneuver those streets.
Yeah, I think we can, after the public comment and our deliberation, I'm happy to raise that again with the commission and just kind of entertain some thoughts to help staff a little bit. But I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing any data on that. Okay.
All right. Any other questions? You feel comfortable jumping over to the public hearing at this point? All right. At this point, we will open the public hearing and I'll ask staff to open up public comments.
Okay, so if there's anyone in the conference call that wishes to provide public comment on this agenda item, please press *9 to virtually raise your hand. Once it's your turn, you're going to hear a notification that the host is inviting you to participate. And at that time, you're going to press *6 to unmute yourself. And you can go ahead and begin speaking. Keep in mind that you're going to have 3 minutes to speak, but make sure you turn off all your other devices so you don't get feedback. And so while I'm waiting to see public comment, I'm just going to see if we have any live chats here. See none so far. I do see a couple of raised hands, so I'm going to go ahead and allow.
And just a quick reminder to keep the comments to 3 minutes or less, please.
Good evening. This is Bill Carney with Sustainable San Rafael. And I will admit off the bat, I'm quite confused by the ordinance that I read versus what was presented tonight. So I want to clarify that we're not looking for any additional limits. In fact, we're looking to make it easier to build as much rental housing as possible. And ADUs seem a great way of doing that. So we want to encourage this whole process. There were two particular items that caught our attention that seemed to limit this. One was in section C1A, the table, and it states maximum height for at least the two main categories to be 16 feet. We believe that what is meant, according to what was said tonight, is the maximum height allowed in the applicable zoning district, but not less than 16 feet. So that's point one. And point two has to do with the maximum number per lot. The current statement is that, this is section C1D1, not more than one accessory dwelling unit shall be permitted per legal lot. Well, what I've heard tonight, if I heard correctly, was that up to 3 were permitted. One basic one JD, one junior ADU, and an additional one. So unless I heard wrong, we weren't meaning to request any additional restrictions if that's correct. So what I would request is that a confirmation of both those items, the height and the number of units, to confirm that up to 3 units are allowed, ADU units are allowed on single family lots. And if so, would request that that language be clarified. So thank you very much.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. My name is Shirley Fisher.
Shirley, I'm not sure. Can you, looks like I may have either muted you or. Shirley, you there? Shirley, if you can hear me, can you press *6?
I think you might have to allow her to talk again.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Finally, thank you. My *6 has been going and going. Okay, so my name is Shirley Fisher. Tonight I'm representing Responsible Growth Marin and Terra Linda Homeowners Association. I'll also be presenting comments from 2 other individuals from these organizations who are unable to attend tonight's meeting. I want to, for myself, support the recommendations submitted by Victoria DeWitt, particularly the request that additional wording be added to section C1D number 2, general standards, to discourage ADUs from being used as short-term rentals, such as Airbnb or VRBO. Specifically, quote, the rental term of all or a portion of the accessory dwelling unit or the existing primary residence must be 30 days or more with consecutive tenancy. And referring to SMRC 10.110.020 for the enforcement action. If Santa Fe is really serious about increasing the amount of housing, ADUs that are counted towards RHNA housing numbers should be used for long-term housing. Transitory short-term rentals may also have more of an adverse impact on the surrounding residences in terms of parking and noise than long-term tenants, and they certainly don't do anything to help our housing our residents. Removing parking requirements for certain ADUs, as specified in the ordinance, can also have a cumulative effect on crowding on on-street parking, as has been experienced in other neighborhoods in Santa Fe. And the city should do whatever possible within state law to prevent adding congestion in on-street parking in the outlying neighborhoods of Santa Fe. I do support the restriction on ADUs in steep hillside neighborhoods where access and safe egress are important concerns. Those are my comments. Now, speaking for Susan Coleman from Responsible Growth Marin and Terra Linda Homeowners, concerns that she has. I'm opposed to Airbnb, Verbo, and other short-term rentals in ADUs. These ADUs are meant to fill a housing void, not to be a profit opportunity. Number 2, the city should carefully consider and evaluate parking requirements in specific neighborhoods. On our narrower roads in particular, these ADUs should be discouraged where turnarounds and parking bays are not available and where parking will be a challenge. Number 3, permitting ADUs to be placed in front yards seems inconsistent with the feel of single-family homes and should be prohibited. And then speaking for Pamela Reeves, also from Responsible Growth of Marin and Terra Linda Homeowners, number 1, this has been a bit addressed tonight. Can we have confirmation of the number of short-term rental units that are currently in San Rafael? Allowing ADUs to be used for short-term rentals seems to be kind of a crime when we need so much housing availability of all kinds. I'm not against people renting out their homes while they're on vacation or away from home or while they're helping a loved one. But that's very different from so many of the short-term rentals around here that are patronized by tourists and are used primarily to generate revenue. We need housing in the ADUs, not revenue. And those are the comments for this evening.
Linda, I think you're. Uh-oh.
Try again.
I want to turn off your other device.
Try it this way.
Linda, if you have any other device, if you can turn it off, that might be what's happening.
I'll try again.
Nice. There you go.
Okay. Linda Jackson, San Rafael resident and program director for the Aging Action Initiative. This is for over 280 organizations in Marin that work with the well-being of older people. So people who are over 50, if you will. And San Rafael just accepted its age-friendly plan, which really looks for the well-being of people who are 65 and older. There are over 6,000 households in San Rafael of people who are older households. ADUs are not just helpful for extended families and intergenerational living, but for caregivers, for people when they get into their 80s and 90s, for economic security, for people who are house rich, cash poor, and living into their 80s and 90s beyond their Social Security. That's warning to all of you who are younger and saving money for the day. And they also provide a place perhaps for the homeowner to downsize into, and the house can then be for a family member and their family. So they are a really vital sense for a housing stock. I looked up just now on Craigslist. There are 5 ADUs for rent in San Rafael. 4 of the 5 are affordable to either a moderate income or low income household. So even without deed restrictions or other protections, by their very size, they are affordable units. They are an essential part of a community's housing stock and have made a difference in the state of California with the state law changes. So I'm thrilled to see San Rafael update its ordinance. And I understand the reasons for the restrictions on narrow hillside streets. JDUs should continue to be allowed in those houses because that is just carved out of existing residential space. They're not new units being added. It'd be like having a space for your 16-year-old who got a new car. So, but I understand the limits on the ADUs in those areas. They are shown to be a real addition in our communities in Marin and a lifesaver for older residents who want to stay in San Rafael in their home and live comfortably and safely for the next 5 years of their lives. So thank you so much.
I think that is. Do not see any more. I do not see any more in the regular chat and do not see anything in here. So I believe that is it.
Okay, thank you. I am now going to close public hearing. Thank you all for your comments and messages. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to call on each commissioner. So I think we can just kind of run down the line person by person. Just kind of share your thoughts about what we've kind of gone through today. Any additional questions you have for staff, as well as any closing comments about sort of your overall thoughts. So I'll go in order that I see on our roster. I'll start with Commissioner Davidson. Oh, go ahead, Allie.
I just thought, given some of the questions that came up, I thought it might be helpful to just make some clarifications. Sure. Regarding the number of ADUs that can be allowed. The state legislation does say that for an attached conversion ADU, this is under the guaranteed ADUs, you can have 1 JADU and 1 ADU. Separately, you can also have a detached ADU that can be combined with the 1 JADU that I just mentioned. You cannot have 3 though. The most you could have would be 2 ADUs, and this is under the guaranteed ADUs in single family residential units. And then in terms of the height allowed, the maximum height is 16 feet. If somebody wished to exceed that height, they would be able to do that with a discretionary process, an administrative design review process. So that would be a possibility, but they would have to apply for that. And even in that case, they would have to comply with the development standards of the primary residence, meaning they could not exceed the height of the primary residence. So I wanted to clarify that. And I did want to just mention, I pulled up a list of ADUs that were submitted this last year in 2020. And we have 31 ADUs that were applied for within the city. So I think that answers the questions that came up that I wanted to address. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thanks for that, Allie. That was helpful. So yeah, let's just run down the roster in order. We'll start with Commissioner Davidson.
I think the ordinance, it's doing its purpose, that it's complying with the state mandates. And I think if I understand correctly, the fee issue and the short rental issue are separate things that will come later, right? Those two don't have to be part of this ordinance. And if that's the case, then I'm in support of the existing ordinance changes.
And so the short-term rental question, again, that's something that we did not include prohibition on short-term rentals, because the city council did address this exact topic when they adopted the short-term rental ordinance. And so it doesn't have to be part of this. It could be something that we look into, and we can provide that as an option for the city council, but at this time, this is not what staff is recommending. And then the fee, regarding the fee and limitations on, whether we kind of ease back on the fees for ADUs that are greater than 750 square feet, that is something that we can look at separately, and it doesn't have to be and wouldn't be part of this ordinance. It would be separate.
Okay, thank you. So I don't have any further questions. I'm ready to support the ordinance changes as proposed.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Lubomirsky.
I think it's great. I think our traditional single bedroom areas have to adapt and change to, I hope someday my kids will be able to live relatively close to me. I will be dying here if all goes well. So yeah, no, I think it's a great program, and you can't please everyone. I think there could be little tweaks, but it's a start, and I think we'll just build on it. So I'm in support of it. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Mercado.
Thanks. Let's see. I'm glad, Allie, thank you for clearing that up on the height and the units. I was a little confused as well. I think the short-term rental discussion that went through already. And I don't know, Allie, do you know, does the state address it through its government code? Does it discuss short-term housing?
It does say that JADUs cannot be used for short-term rentals. It says short-term rentals, but it says something like less than 30 days, but does not have that requirement for ADUs. It doesn't.
That's the only guidance.
Yeah, it doesn't preclude
Gotcha.
us from the ability to establish some short-term rental prohibitions, but it doesn't
Yeah.
limit us. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is I appreciate the community's concerns about having these turn into, income streams or whatever, but I think there's other mechanisms. I mean, the state is clearly saying we're not meeting our RENA numbers. We're not allowing the community to build the way that the state thinks we need to, and they're going to press on us to do this. So I think you guys did a great job taking a convoluted area, trying to streamline it. I think there are a couple of areas that are a little confusing. I agree with one of the callers on that. I think what I'm seeing is the front yard issue still jumps out at me. What is that? Can I build in my front yard? How would that be established? How would that be different? Is that as right? Is it not? That one still is a little confusing for me. And maybe within this ordinance or somewhere, maybe we make it tonight, but a clarity as to the amount of units for the council to appreciate, like this is the cap. Because worst case scenario, people are going to think you could have 5 units on there. You can do all this development and conversion of structures. So I think it'd be good to clarify that to the best we can. But no, I mean, I support it. This is a great step, I think, in the right direction.
Can I add one more thing? Just in terms of your question earlier about the roadways,
Yes.
I did inspect the resolution, and there is a section in there under the where you get to now therefore be it resolved under item number 2. It does talk about public health and safety and how the ordinance addresses that by prohibiting ADUs in certain narrow and steeply sloped streets due to public safety concerns. So I believe that addresses that question you had, but if you think that needs to be bulked up, we can modify that as well.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing it. So narrow, steeply sloped streets due to public safety concerns. I think what I'm missing is I don't understand the matrix of it. Was it a discretion call by the fire chief, just sitting down with Paul, going through it and saying, yeah, this street is way too narrow? I mean, I think that's fine. I think what I don't understand is where that data is. So the finding in there makes sense. I think it's in alignment with what the state wants, and it probably makes sense for why it would be. But I'm thinking, if I'm putting a JDU on my property, I maybe will have an additional bike because it's a small and somebody's going to be riding their bike. Why is that restricted? Versus if my zoning allows me to kick up my house and do another story, and I can have a bunch more people living with me there, that seems like the impact of that greatly outweighs the JDU here. So it may not necessarily need to be the resolution, but I think there needs to be a system that the city has where if an owner goes in, maybe it's within just the database of that property with an explanation for why the street is there. Because the other thing I'm thinking about is if Public Works is working on that street and it later expands it, I believe the director is supposed to keep that list updated. So then it's going to grow and contract as well. There should be findings for the director when that's happening for what that process would look like. So if the list is getting bigger, is it coming back to the planning commission? Is it delegated to the director to do that? Equally, when a street has been improved to a certain degree, then how is it pulled off of that list? And what would be the authority to do that so that the community knows, oh, okay, this is the process. So that's what's missing for me. So I think the resolution is fine. I think it's just more a little bit, how would that process be? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I can speak to it a little bit, and but we'll definitely need to work through to make sure it's a really clear and open and easy for somebody to understand. But right now, the streets were taken from a list of streets that the fire department's already looking as part of the fire management plan. And so there is a process that's happening and unfolding. Okay. And so they have created a list of those streets that are of concern, and they're actually doing like on-site surveys to just kind of verify. And so and that's kind of one of the reasons that we identified the need to update and revise as needed as we continue to, as a fire department continues to do these surveys, and then as this parking box program begins to unfold, there might be opportunities for eliminating, and if there's widening, there might be an ability to eliminate. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think we will establish a very clear process and clear understanding of why the roadways have been added to or eliminated from the list.
Yeah, because this is really unusual. I mean, can somebody appeal it? Is it appeal? Is it a determination? Is it not? Equally as much with what the state is requiring. If you meet these criteria, now it's as right. At what point does it become discretionary? There may be other parts of it that it may or may not. So I just think there's some guidance. And again, I appreciate this is all happening in real time. So there isn't that guidance per se, because we've been able to kind of stumble through it for the last few years. So you guys are doing great on it, but these are just the questions that I appreciate can come out for potential applicants as they're trying to also stumble through this convoluted change. But great job. No, I think it's, like I said, it's a great step in the right direction.
Commissioner Saudi?
I have a few things. I guess as we're talking about the narrow streets, that's one of the items that I'd like to have more clarification on. I see Linda Jackson still on the line, but she brought up a great comment, and a comment that I was thinking about prior to hers coming on, which is there may be people like in neighborhoods or on streets that are considered narrow. And I think to take a whole street and, you know, give it that blanket statement may prohibit individual owners that are trying to do things that are niche. Like, for instance, if somebody has an aging or disabled parent that they want to build an ADU for, that's not necessarily going to provide, that's not going to create an impact on like vehicular access. And it's not going to really change the way that, like, you know, the fire department accesses their home. I mean, there may be more reasons, or even not even just an aging parent, but like a child who is returning, you know, like an adult child who needs to stay on the property that used to live there as well, you know. So I just want to make sure that the applicants have choice and that we're able to really encourage properties, obviously within the realm of safety. I agree with Commissioner Mercado, just that we need to have like better guidance so that it isn't like super discretionary, and that the owners have like a real understanding of objectively what the fire department and Paul's looking at, and they can actually look at their property and evaluate on whether or not they can apply for a variance, and that if it needs to go to the planning commission, or, you know, there are steps in place where if somebody has a good case and you, Allie, the planning manager or future planning managers have the ability to say, you know, like this seems like it could be something that we'd like to approve, that there's a course for them to go through and get the ADUs. And I do think that we have, I really do want to, you know, proceed with recommending that we approve all these changes. I think they're great changes. I am full support of ADUs and just encouraging them. The whole issue with short-term rentals is definitely multifaceted and it's complex. And I think, you know, on one side there, it can really cause issues with, you know, just the affordability of housing in San Rafael. Right now, we obviously have a shortage, and that's like maybe causing, you know, it's causing rental increases. But as we get more units, are people then like, you know, renting them out and then exacerbating those the rents of those units because they can, you know, rent them out as short-term rentals. And I think that's a separate discussion, but it's obviously tied to this. But I'm in full support of recommending approval of the new modifications. And I thank you guys for all the work that you've done. I know it's not easy, and it's definitely complex. So I appreciate it.
Thanks. Vice Chair Provatali?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree. This is a great piece of work, and I'm looking forward to the ordinance. I also agree with the points that were made about clarifying the process around narrow streets, restrictions on narrow streets. If there's any clarity needed for hillsides as well, might want to consider that. Seems like that may be already clear and transparent, but food for thought. Regarding short-term rentals, I live next to a short-term rental for 5 years, and it was strange. So it really took away from the feeling of the neighborhood to have people come there and stay for a few days. It was mostly people working. It was actually a sort of like a group work situation. So I'm certainly in favor of limiting the number of short-term rentals that are allowed in San Rafael, potentially through a permitting process. And I realize that there's no reason to change the ordinance that we're discussing now, but I think we should consider changing the ordinance that does not limit short-term rentals for that reason and the other reasons that people discussed. Finally, I have to say I feel hesitancy around allowing ADUs in front yards. as well, as one of the speakers mentioned. I feel like that should also really change the face of some neighborhoods or just even some blocks in a negative way. And I know that, you know, if there's an allowance for ADUs in front yards, as there is now, there's going to be pressure to permit those when the time comes. And so I'd rather deal with the question now and potentially disallow ADUs in front yards, as long as we can confirm that, you know, we would have sufficient ADUs in backyards. Like if there's some neighborhoods out there that I don't know about that have tiny backyards and giant front yards, then, you know, I think that should be considered, and that would probably change my opinion, but I'm just not aware of neighborhoods like that. Seems like most spaces in the backyard.
Commissioner Pravatali, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the 15-yard setback 15-foot front yard setback doesn't really allow for people to build in there unless they have huge front yards, right? Because right now, like most
I
front
consider
yards
that.
are 20 feet. Yeah. I mean, I had the same thought process. And then I was like, actually, there's very few properties that would have that condition.
Yeah, no, I consider that as well. Yeah, I was thinking about that as well, going through my mind. Like 15 feet does seem like a good amount of space. But I feel like there probably are a lot of properties that have, you know, at least 15 feet in the front yard. So I think we would see potentially some ADUs in front yards. I don't know. Maybe Allie, what do you think about that? Or Michelle?
So I have seen ADU proposals in the front yard that are almost side by side and designed to look similar to the existing residence. And because we don't currently have an ADU ordinance, as long as they comply with development standards, they're able to do that. And I'm also thinking this, you know, what Commissioner Sadi was saying, there would have to be kind of a unique, you know, situation where you have a large enough front yard and to almost, like in terms of envisioning that ADU taking over the front yard, it would have to be a pretty significant size front yard. That said, the guaranteed ADU allows for an ADU in the front yard. So there is that potential for having, regardless of like whatever standard we come up with, the guaranteed ADU could be located in the front yard, regardless.
Yeah, I don't think that the statute, to Commissioner Pravatali's question, I don't think the statute intends to limit that. So I don't think the government code intends to limit whether it's front yard or rear side. I mean, I think it's a really interesting question that, again, needs to be this discussion.
Okay, thanks. I guess are folks on the commission typically or generally in favor of allowing ADUs in the front yard then?
I would be.
Okay.
I would, because I know that like you need a 30-foot front yard to be able to even fit a, you know, and with the, you know, just with the size of it, I think that I would be in favor of it.
Okay.
Can I just clarify real quick? I want to make sure I understand what your question was, Vice Chair. Because from my years at the counter, I know that this is a very confusing topic for people when we say front yard versus required front yard. I just want to make sure I understand what the rest of the commission was saying as far as you're in favor of ADUs being outside the required front yard, but in front of the house? Or do you mean you're actually in favor of them being in the required 15 feet? Or either?
Laissez-faire in that respect. Like if it complies with existing code, then, you know, as the property owner, you put it up where you want to put it up.
I would say within that required code. So some, depending on the zoning district, it can be 15 feet or 20 feet. I think as long as it complies with the the, you know, whatever the code requires, and absolutely, yeah. It's pretty stringent in the front yard, so.
Yeah, personally, I'm still against it. I feel like there's a lot of work that's been put into, a lot of thought and sort of, you know, design and aesthetics that have been put into ensuring that we have beautiful fronts of the houses, and to allow an ADU, which is probably going to be a really inexpensive build, to be put in front of those nice houses seems like a bad idea to me, as opposed to just keeping them in the back. That's where I'm coming from.
Well, I think one thing to consider is that, you know, the history of Marin was one of a community carefully designed to keep and exclude certain people out. So I think, you know, as a process of kind of unwinding a lot of that, one of the things that we kind of have to acknowledge is that, you know, some of these elements may have to change, especially if with regards to like dealing with housing crisis. But just one food for thought.
And I was shocked, frankly, when I learned of the exclusionary practices, the racist practices of trying to keep people out of my neighborhood of Terra Linda during the 50s. Shocked. And I still see some of that racism here, and I'm vehemently opposed to it. However, I feel like it's there, in my opinion, you know, allowing ADUs in the fronts of houses wouldn't prevent new populations of people from moving into the city, particularly since we are allowing ADUs in the backs of houses. And also we are about to hopefully add, you know, over 1,500 units at Northgate Mall, you know, and other developments. So, I mean, I think that, you know, we're definitely working on being changing the horrible history of non-inclusion here. So I hope you didn't interpret my suggestion to not allow ADUs in the fronts of houses as being exclusionary in any way, because it wasn't.
No, I did not. It was a more broad point, more so about just the fact that like there are, since we are as a community kind of transitioning, moving from sort of one state of history to another, I think that it's important to just recognize that, you know, we may have certain aesthetic preferences, but sometimes given the other pressing concerns, you know, we may want to be mindful of the, let's call them bureaucratic barriers that we put up to people being able to, you know, provide housing the way they see it necessary. And, you know, we may have properties that, you know, it makes more sense to put it in the front than the back. And so I would hate to, you know, put some unnecessary barriers for, you know, that specific set of circumstances, because people in a community that would never otherwise put them in their own front yards just wanted to have a law or have a set of permits that prevented it everywhere.
I understand. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that.
And also, I have a thought in addition to that, all of these regulations are relatively new, and the data that we're going to collect is going to perhaps change legislation in 2 or 3 years based on what came out of these changes. And given Ali's numbers that we processed 30 in the last year, I don't really foresee a complete change in character in a lot of these homes and a lot of the streets and San Rafael in general, especially in the next year or two. And I totally understand your point, Commissioner Prevatelli, but I think we're in the data collection, and maybe in the next year or two, we'll have more data as to what really changed. And we can look into not just the numbers, but also character and just the looks. But we need more data. We're trying to like build them and then analyze.
Yeah, I think to your point, I think we'll have a pretty good lead time, because I think, you know, the process of doing all the permits in general to be able to put the ADUs. I mean, we'll, to Commissioner Davidson's point, we'll have the data points on like what the pipeline looks like. Is there going to be cause for concern in terms of the volume of new ADUs, or is this a problem where we're kind of like, trying to preemptively solve a problem that never actually manifests, and again, creating sort of unnecessary hurdles for people to jump through. And I think the same thing for the short-term rentals, because I think, like I said, the data that I was able to get, we only have 104 right now, and I think it represents something like $12,000 in taxes and fees collected by the city. So it's not a relatively impactful piece on the budget at this point. We, again, at any point in the future, we can, just like South Lake Tahoe did, put a cap on the number of registrations or the number of licenses that are at large at any point in time. But I'm just hesitant to put restrictions on the go that we would then have to go and unroll, as opposed to having the flexibility, if we see a trend, to kind of put a cap on it based on impact data that we're able to actually gather from the ADUs and the STRs that we're seeing right now in the market.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between capping the numbers and restricting the ADUs, and then just creating better rules for those ADUs to exist. Because like Commissioner Privatali, I live next to an ADU that was very problematic. Fortunately, I had neighbors on the other side who were mobilized, and we were able to change the practices of that ADU, and it has since not been a big issue. It's still uncomfortable to see random people in the neighbor's backyard, but it allows that person, that owner, to stay in their property. And that may be something for like a homeowner who's aging. They can build an ADU, live in it, rent out their house short term or whatever, and actually stay in their home. So there's always like kind of two sides to the coin, but I think instead of restricting short-term housing, we just think about what we like about it and what we don't like about it, and then help create an infrastructure that creates the optimal environment for it, right?
Yeah.
Because there's ways these companies are trying to get around the issues anyway with different, there's all these different ways to get around some of the ordinances different large cities are putting up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think instead of restricting them, we just have to understand how to really address the problems that are most impactful.
Yeah. No, I feel like this has become a larger conversation than I intended it to be. I am pro ADU.
This is a conversation that we need to have, though. So it's good.
Okay. Well, I'm just against ADUs in the front yard. That's it. So I like ADUs. I want more ADUs.
Yeah.
I want an ADU in the backyard, my yard. I don't have enough space, but I would not put an ADU in the front of my yard. That would be a mistake. My neighbors would kill me.
Yeah.
So.
I'm sure some of the neighborhoods also have like HOAs and other deed restrictions that are on top of this that this doesn't even cover. I'm almost certain that Terra Linda does, right?
I'm not in an HOA here. No, there's no HOA in Terra Linda. And I think that I'm not sure if I have enough space in the front. It's like probably 20 feet.
Yeah.
So maybe I could have a very slender ADU just covering the entire front of my house. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
I think to Commissioner Davidson's point, Allie, do you know, and before the chair maybe gets more comments in, is there a follow-up component on this as the data is being collected? Does the state or the city plan to have sort of like we do with our general plan, a couple of years check in to see, have we been inundated with front yard ADUs that Commissioner Privatali warned us about or not? I mean, is it just kind of is there a process for checking in to do the adjustments we may need?
Yeah, I mean, we do update the city council regularly on where we stand with housing production, and one of those topics should definitely be where we are with ADUs. And I mean, often with our updates, we do provide information on, you know, where there are issues. We provide the city council with that information. So, I mean, if we find that we are, you know, in the next, you know, 3 to 5 years that we are seeing a lot of ADUs in the front yard, and they're creating issues, that we would be inclined to bring those up and kind of come up with a solution, not just with the city council, but also probably kind of as an update to the planning commission as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and that's what I wanted. I think it'd be great. I would love to see the planning commission retain a little bit of jurisdiction to get an analysis in a few years on kind of the layout of these ADUs, and as well the component, the overlay with short-term housing. You know, are these vacation rentals? Are they not? I think that's the hybrid of the conversation we have tonight. That seems to be what a lot of the public had as well. But I think would only be fair to have a check-in at when the data's there, just so we can look at it and say, oh, okay, we were wrong, we were right, we should tweak it, we should not. So that would be my only additional recommendation.
Yeah. Do we, so on that point, do we have, and I mean, it's only what, 1 quarter this year, but do we have any data on the number of additional ADUs and short-term rental registrations for 2021?
For this year, not right. If we had another few minutes, I might be able to dig it up.
Okay, it's not essential at this point. I was going to try to do some like napkin math, but I think that, yeah, I think if we could take a look at the trajectory, it might be worthwhile then to say, you know, based on the trajectory, let's plan on, you know, it's like a study session or something like that, and, you know, at X date, and then revisit it and make additional recommendations if need be, just to kind of do that touch point.
Yeah, I mean, just going back though, I think that the numbers are pretty consistent, about in the range of about 30 per year since I want to say 2017 is when the legislation first started kind of transforming. But yeah, there's been that many in the past few years.
Okay, so it's pretty small.
I would just anecdotally, this is like not, you know, data driven at all, but I definitely know that people are planning to build more ADUs, you know, just having talked to friends and homeowners and, you know, people around town, especially right now, they're planning them as COVID is, you know, progressing. And like, Michelle, you probably get questions all the time, right? So I'm guessing you have like a different data set because you're just getting people inquiring. If those turn out to be people actually building them, that's one thing, but I have a feeling we're going to see an increase, but that might be it might be like a, you know, a big bell curve, and it may wane. We don't know, but I think we will probably see an increase this next year.
Yeah. So what would be, so Commissioner Ricardo, in your mind, in addition to just sort of raw numbers, what would be some other metrics that might be useful to kind of check? Because I'm sure that there's going to be some sort of counterbalance of like, yeah, we're seeing this rise, but there may be some additional benefit along with the I don't know, negative externalities of that new stuff coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I think would be interesting is, so the raw numbers, to the extent that there's geographic areas, we may start finding patterns that would also impact whether there's a trajectory towards those roads that have been closed or prohibited. So the city can anticipate, oh, there's something happening here. The location of them, I mean, just generally, I think raw data, you know, this is kind of what we're seeing as a planning department. This is where they're being built typically. This is the size, and maybe a quick column or chart between these are the as right under the square footage, and these are how many we received, just to give us an idea as to where these are going. And that will also help frame, if you're finding, especially Michelle, these questions that are coming in that are creating ambiguities by applicants, can we tweak the language to help reduce that ambiguity? So I'm just thinking that would be, to me, really interesting to see where it's at. And I think as a planning commission, that's where we could help provide the council, if they need to revisit the code, some analysis to help them understand, okay, this is maybe how to tweak it a little bit. And during that time, we'll probably get guidance from the state, other counties, other cities that have had other issues. But those are the main areas: geography, kind of the pattern of it, the location, and the general size would be super interesting. Honestly, it's kind of what your presentation was tonight, those like 3 areas.
That makes sense. Okay, I think we've had a pretty good discussion. Any last words or any last thoughts? Okay, if no last comments or thoughts, at this point, I'll request a motion to accept the report and provide feedback.
So moved.
Sorry,
Luba,
interrupt. The motion should be a recommendation on the proposed ordinance would be either recommendation to recommend adoption of the ordinance to the city council, or recommend adoption with modifications, or recommend that staff come back with additional information.
Can we recommend adoption with like further clarification on that narrow streets? How do we kind of word that into the adoption if that was something that we felt strongly about?
I believe what I understand is that the clarification would be to provide some sort of justification and ability to measure, provide clarity to property owners, but also the ability to measure whether there's a need to make adjustments and what that process would be. I mean, thinking that one option could be that rather than it being a modification that's done by the community development director, that it would be a list that's adopted by the city council, and any changes would then come back to the city council. That way there would be a public process. So if a street was added to that list, there would be a public process. If a street was eliminated, there would be a public process, and there would always be clarity in what that would look like. So that didn't really answer your question in terms of how to address the motion. So the motion would be recommend adoption of the ordinance to the city council with a modification that the list of streets that are being proposed as prohibited streets would be considered by the city council, and any changes to those streets would be also considered by the city council at a city council meeting.
I think that's fair. I think it's just more of like having objective standards that are being applied to which streets are being included in that list.
So I would add it in item 2 of the resolution. Allie, you have that last sentence that identifies the narrow streets. Then I would make a motion to include something that would identify the process for revisiting and reanalyzing those narrow streets or those prohibited streets. And I agree, it should be a public hearing, ideally. So I would add at that last sentence something to include revisiting revisiting those prohibited streets and bringing it back to either the planning commission or the city council for adjustments and amendments to those prohibited streets. And let the council pick who they want, if they want to do it, or if they, or even you, I mean, or even the planning director ultimately.
And this is all in coordination with the fire department.
Yes. So I wouldn't propose any changes to the process for determining the streets. This would strictly be adding the review as to changes of those prohibited streets, whether it's expansion or reduction of those streets.
So we have a motion.
Yeah, I mean, motion to advance, to recommend approval of this by the city council with amendments or with adjustment, whatever. Allie, amendment?
With the modifications made by Commissioner Mercado would be the.
Check.
Have a second.
Ally, do you feel?
Motion. I'll second the motion, Commissioner Sadi. Unless you want to add something, Commissioner Mercado?
I don't. I just want to make sure that staff has the guidance they feel they need for the revision.
Yes, I feel like I do. Basically, the modification would be to recommend adoption of the ordinance to the City Council, and with a revision under item 2 of the resolution regarding the roadways that are where ADUs are prohibited, that any changes would be subject to review by the City Council or Planning Commission as determined by the City Council. And so we'll bring that to the City Council and they may decide who would be the appropriate body.
Great.
Okay, so your second stands, correct?
Correct. My second stands.
Is there any discussion on this? Okay, hearing none, I will ask staff to conduct roll call.
Commissioner Davidson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lubomirsky,
Yes.
Commissioner Mercado,
Yes.
Commissioner Saudi,
Yes.
Vice Chair Privatali,
Yes.
and Chair Samudzi.
Yes. All right, thank you. Next, we'll move on to the director's report.
And I have not much to report out. I would like to mention, however, that we did receive an application from the Northgate Mall owners, which I think most of you are aware of. And if we don't have it on our website now, it should be up there by the end of the week. So you should be able to see something if you peruse our website under the major project section. So that's all I have.
All right. Any PC members have any communication? Nope. Okay. In that case, this meeting is adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.